Hi, this is Paul. This dropped yesterday or so. I was at a very busy weekend, obviously with the Northwestuary, and then I flew back into Sacramento and preached at the service. There was no rough draft for Sunday this week because basically I was doing the estuary thing at up in Olympia. But if you're curious about what happened with the sermon, you can. I believe it should have recorded fine on the church channel, and the link to that is below. And then Rick, who wasn't able to make a church, which is why I think pretty sure it recorded fine. Big thanks to James, who really is a huge help when Rick can't be here. And anyway, back. Stop bearing the lead. Get on with the show. Rick said this was a good conversation. Listen to it this morning. Was a good conversation. Tons of stuff in it. Only have about an hour to record something, and I got to head out to Palo Alto. Start yet a new estuary. So let's jump in.
Is trying to reanimate this dead hooker called religion. Oh.
Well, there you go. To reanimate this dead hooker called religion. That'll make a good title. Let's talk about Bill Maher first. Bill Maher. Oh, come on.
And bring.
Okay, let's talk about Bill Maher first. I have been following Bill Maher since he was on ABC TV's Politically Incorrect. I used to record that show regularly. And I used that show. That was back in the day when I would often use movie clips and clips from TV and sermon clips in my sermons, or television clips in my sermons. And Bill Maher was a favorite because one of the things I loved about Bill Maher is even though he believes what he does about religion, he always often had religious people on there and he would listen to them. Now, I didn't believe them, but he would listen to them. So in some ways, I see Bill Maher very much as corner and estuary adjacent. Now, having said that, I often find his analysis of religion very shallow. And that comes through again and again in his conversations with Peterson. Now, Peterson clearly likes him, and he clearly likes Peterson. And so Peterson is trying to sort of gently and thoughtfully deepen him. Now, what comes... why did I stop moving? Glitches in my main PC. That doesn't make me happy. Anyway, back to this. Got it working again. Bill Maher grew up in New Jersey. I checked ChatGPT to see if there's a memoir out that he's done. He hasn't done a full one, but from listening to a long time, he grew up in New Jersey. He's a little bit older than I am, a little bit older than Peterson is. And so it's interesting that in some ways the same general environment of the North Jersey major metropolitan area. He went to Catholic school growing up. I went to Christian school. Obviously different upbringings and very different places right now, but let's listen to some more.
Like that. But I got a great, I think, liberal arts education. And
it was just talking to Peterson about Peterson Academy.
So that's kind of what your book reminded me of, but I mean, I'm in a different...
Okay, so Peterson clearly gave him a PDF copy of the book. Maher, just at the very end of the thing, says, yeah, it's the first book I've read on tablet. I usually like to turn the page. Bill Maher has written a few books, and he, in fact, gave Peterson a blurb, and he said he read the whole book, and he appreciated the book. Now, one of the things that interests me about Peterson is that Peterson is definitely not from New Jersey, he's from northern Alberta, but there seems to be sort of a personality, temperamental, something that I can relate to in both Peterson and Maher, and I think they both see it in each other. There's a degree to which they're both able to stand up and say what they think, even against perhaps their own corner or their own self-interest, and this is something that, some people appreciate, depending on exactly what they're saying and where they're saying it. Now he'll say this line that he just said before.
In place when I was in the 70s, I've been an atheist, and I felt like I feel like you're a lapsed atheist. I feel like it's a paradox that someone of your extraordinary intellectual abilities is trying.
So again, this is the usual atheist thing that if you're smart and you're well-read, you'll be an atheist. That idea doesn't hold, hasn't held, has never held.
to reanimate this dead hooker called religion and bring it back to life in some way or find what's useful in it, when why try to take these?
Because you get false substitutes emerge.
I know what does that mean?
Now it's so interesting because Peter Boghossian would know exactly what that meant, because that, of course, has become Peter Boghossian's beat. Peter Boghossian used to believe like Bill Maher, and now Peter Boghossian thinks no. And Peter Boghossian is still an atheist, and he still thinks that religion is hogwash, but he realizes that. And now what Peterson will do, I think, is really helpful.
Well, imagine that your systems of ideas, imagine that they're either unified or not unified. Those are basically the options, right? And if they are unified, there's something under which they have to be unified. And if they're not unified, then they're in conflict, and that's not good. That makes you anxious, it makes you hopeless, it breeds social discord.
Now, before we go too far, I'm not going to have anywhere near enough time to go through this, because there's a lot of good stuff in this video. And this is, I think this is, there's lots of different Jordans depending on the context and who he's speaking with. This is sort of Jordan, the patient friend who would really like to gently help another friend see beyond this sort of shallow view that Bill Maher has said. And so Peterson just basically here reintroduces hierarchy. But the little bit that he said, which is really helpful to notice, is that of integration. And if a person is divided in themselves, they will not have integrity. That's basically what the word means. They will not be at rest. They will have no peace. And similarly, a nation that is divided between itself will have no peace. And so Peterson makes the larger argument that one way or another, the parts are going to have to fit together.
Ideas are in conflict, you're saying?
Yes.
But ideas are always in conflict.
But if they're in conflict too much, people go to war and they fall apart.
Well,
right? I mean, look, you want diversity and you want difference in opinion because you want to keep.
Again, you saw it there. People go to war, people fall apart.
Things churning. But
what has made people go to war more than anything? Belief in who's the real God. I mean, religion, I could take any number of reasons why I think it's better to junk the whole thing, but start with.
Now, again, that's a popular meme that people definitely fight over religion, but to sort of frame it as a secularist and say there's this religion stuff over here and that's separate from everything else, as if, let's see, the Japanese fought the United States over religion, that Germany fought Russia over religion, that Germany fought France and Poland over religion. That, I mean, it just doesn't really hold. But if you pull it back to Peterson's larger point about integration and the productive engagement of differences, then suddenly you realize that people fight wars over all sorts of things. And Maher just sort of says, well, people fight wars over religion. Well, people fight wars over all kinds of other things. If you look at, for example, the First World War, I've mentioned this book a number of times. There's a really wonderful book about the religious aspect of the First World War. And there definitely is a religious aspect of the First World War, which is seldom looked at. But it's really fascinating the way the different nations sort of framed this. And of course, all of the nations, you look at, say, the United States during the Second World War, and that through the filter of Pope Pius XI and Pope Pius XII. You could look at a country like France. Well, is France Catholic or secular? Or is their secular, the way that they're secular, is that Catholic? And how about Spain? Is Spain Catholic or secular? And you can just go down the list and you begin to discover that religion is not sort of the widget that everybody thinks it is.
Religions are supremacist, just by their nature. If you're telling people...
And what's funny is that Peterson just basically said, you sort of need something at the top that coheres the whole thing. And Maher says, well, it's supremacist. And you would pause and say, well, isn't that basically the definition of what it's at the top? Now, what again is very interesting here is that Maher is a wonderful example of Tom Holland's thesis that Maher has so much Christian code in his moral imagination, and it's been so laundered by secularity and Western history, that while he sort of lauds Western civilization, he just finished talking about all the things that he read in Western civilization back before it was sort of, pushed to the side by the woke. Well, that's, of course, all the product of Christianity.
But what happens when you die, which nobody knows, and you're telling who the great master of the universe is, you kind of have to be in a place where you can't abide other thoughts on the subject. And certainly all religions are like that. Islam is...
Now, notice how good Peterson is here. Now, I've mentioned many times status comes into this. Maher is a high status guy. Maher is someone that is useful for Jordan. It's helpful for Jordan's overall effort to stay on good terms with Bill Maher. But again, I think there's a genuine friendship between them. I don't think it's, on one level, certainly one is using the other because there's certainly a degree of alignment between them. But this, I think, is a good faith conversation. The difficulty, I think, again, is that Maher is just a little shallow.
Super supremacist in that way. And a lot of the people today who are speaking for it will tell you right to your face, why am I supporting this? Because Islam is the best. Of course, obviously, that's why we justify these things. And certainly the Bible, same thing. I mean, God is very supremacist for the Jews. I find it very amusing that the thing that they are accusing the Jews of today of doing, colonizing, ethnic cleansing, which are neither true, are true in the Bible. That's exactly what God tells the Jews to do. Ethnically cleanse the Canaanites, commit genocide if...
Now, before we get too far, I've been looking at, what's the guy's name? Jason, I forget his last name. He's just written a couple of books on Israel and the Jews. And this is a point that Tom Holland has been making too, in terms of we've really got a lot of anachronism going on here, because even in the Apostle Paul, it appears that when Paul talks about the Jews, he's talking about the southern kingdom. And when he talks about Israel, he's talking about, well, what is he talking about? There's this huge conversation going on right now on that matter. But of course, Maher just takes the whole thing and sort of collapses it all together. And in a little while, we'll see that his Bible knowledge isn't very good too.
You have to. God tells them, kill all the men. This is this in the Bible. You've written about it in there. To kill all the men, the Midianites, another number of people, kill all the men and the women who aren't virgins, kids. I mean,
yeah, standard pattern of human warfare.
And again, Peterson is so interesting here in that he's very patient. He's very calm. He's listening carefully. So this is really good. Now there'll be a little commercial here a second, I think.
I know, but for people who take a book as the guide to morality, it's filled with terrible morality.
Okay, so yeah, now they have their little commercial. Now again, even pay attention to, okay, what do we mean by morality? And in fact, this whole, what was I thinking about? Morality when I was watching a different conversation. This whole premise of, it's basically C.S. Lewis's premise at the beginning of Mere Christianity, that people basically assume a morality up there and out there that is static and fixed. Oh, I remember when I was thinking about it. I'm definitely not going to get through this whole video. And like I said, I've got to leave for Palo Alto, and traffic is going to be a nightmare. But we'll see if I come back to it. There's a dozen videos I want to come back to. Anyway, Glenn Lowry's Late Admissions, Confessions of a Black Conservative. Really enjoying this book. And of course, I'm reading way too many books at once and doing way too many projects at once. But there's this poignant section when now he's about 18 years old. He's smart, he was precocious. He's working in school, but what he really wants to be is a player. He really wants to be a hustler. And so now he's perfecting his pool game. He's hanging out the pool halls. He's trying to be a pool shark to basically take money from rubes. And he's hanging out at this pool hall, and it's Saturday afternoon, 2 or 3 o'clock. I'm hanging out at a pool hall across from the Roberts Motel. The motel will soon acquire a reputation for offering first-rate music, food, and entertainment to black clientele in the South Side, but it also offers the same kind of service any other motel offers. Most of the couples who check in there don't have any luggage with them. This pool hall has a 3-cushion billiard table, a rarity, and the proprietor is an older guy who's very serious about this challenging, elegant game. So I sometimes come in just to watch him play and learn some technique. I'll never be as good as him, but the precision required for the 3-cushion billiard is so extreme, it gets that getting even a little better at it will work wonders for the rest of my game. I look up from my table, and through the pool hall's big glass window, I see my mother coming across the street. She is in full flower, beautiful, busty, hippie, with a form-fitting dress and a stole of some kind wrapped around her neck. She's on a man's arm, and that man is not her husband. In fact, I don't know who this guy is. I watched as they crossed the street and head towards the pool hall. When they enter, it feels as though the world I have built for myself here is being trespassed upon by visitors from another planet. The pool hall serves as a workshop for my still burgeoning masculinity, and the presence of my mother and what I suppose is her quote-unquote date reminds me that, in age, I am little more than a child. Mama sees me, approaches, and awkwardly introduces the man. He shakes my hand, looks me dead in the eye, and grins. His face betrays not a hint of shame. He seems a little too amused by this coincidence, a little too happy to see me. He's running his hand along my mother's shoulder, along her hips. With every touch and caress, he seems to be daring me to say something, and he challenges me to a game of 8-ball. Now, I can put this in context for the rest of the book. Glenn Lowry's father is a very honorable, organized man who, even though it appears that Glenn Lowry's little sister was not his child, to his dying day, always embraced that little girl and called her his own. Now, again, some people might call him a cuck, but of course, Glenn Lowry looks at that and says, this is an honorable man. And his mother, of course, who he dearly loves, has just been in a hotel. I mean, she is a player, but she's a player on the female side. Now, he wants to become a player on the male side. And in the next chapter, in fact, he's 18, he's going to get a 15-year-old girl pregnant, and she knows this but hasn't told him, and he gets caught in her bedroom with her father with a shotgun, and that smart little 15-year-old girl's way out of this is, but we're getting married, and that sets up a whole bunch of things. And it's a terrific, what makes the book so powerful is it's true, and Lowry tells it well. But I got to this point yesterday when the plane had landed from Seattle, and I'm listening to this, and I was getting up and waiting for everybody to sort of get off, and then I was just thinking about the fact of morality. Somewhere in Glenn Lowry, he knew something was wrong in the universe. He thought there should be an ideal where my father and my mother are together, and my sister and I are both from my father and my mother, and we can be one coherent whole. But of course, Glenn's world and all of our worlds is shattered. But you get this sense of morality about the way things should be. Now, what's so interesting about Bill Maher is that Maher himself, let's see, okay. Later on, he's going to have an in-placement ad for male enhancement products, when you want to and you're feeling a little insecure and you want to have some medicine that's going to help you perform, and it's like, this is for older dudes. Well, no, maybe you want to perform for your wife, all the better, but this is older dudes who, this is Bill Maher and his audience. And you just begin to get a sense of, it's so funny. We're going to talk about morality, and morality is this one thing. Is it, Bill? Is it really? And they'll have a delightful part in this video where in their last conversation, Jordan Peterson basically shocks him. And basically with a little bit of TMI about, well, Tammy and I are still so in love that when we see each other, we both want to rip each other's clothes off. And I can just imagine Michaela and, what's his son's name? And her brother just like, I don't want to hear. So, okay, morality. We can talk about that, Bill.
Keep beating a dead horse about why religion is so horrible in any form, but if you read the teachings of the Mormon Church until recently, the things they say about black people are just...
Now remember, and a little bit later he's going to say, yeah, but the thing about science can change its mind. And this always gets really weird because on one hand, science can change its mind, but what science tells us is somehow, because of course there's this God science, and science tells us, and they don't pause to say, no, wait a minute, science doesn't say anything. Scientists may say things, but science is the kind of thing that all scientists agree on everything. Is that the case? But then he's going to say later, well, science is the kind of thing that it changes, we can change our mind based on the science. And it's like, you don't really see that you have this God named science. And you certainly have sort of covered up the fact that often when you're talking about science, you're really talking about technology. And you have this God named science. And of course, during COVID, we're supposed to believe the science. And of course, Maher will develop some skepticism about believing the science because, well, science is this God, and this God speaks, and this God always speaks truth to us, even though scientists all disagree. And so when religions say, well, there's a God, and the God is all truth, but the religions disagree, they can't understand that in a lot of ways, well, there's a pattern going on here that if you just kind of pull back and watch it and just swap out God for science and sort of watch how the levels and the patterns work, it's not a lot different, really. And of course, yeah, science can change its mind. So now the Mormons, remember what they used to think? Now they've changed their mind. Why is changing your mind a good thing when it comes to science or a bad thing when it comes to religion?
Horrendous. The worst kind of racist thing. And they justify it by talking about that...
Ham.
Well, no, that's interesting. They get it. The black people in religion get it from two sources. The Mormons talk about Cain, that black people are a descendant of Cain, and because Cain is a murderer and he did a dark deed. I mean, they're very open about that's why they have dark skin, to remind us of the darkness in their past. I mean, it's just fucking ugly. Yes, the other thing that the Southerners in this country used was Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham
was the contemptuous son.
Also the one who wanted to fuck his dad. I guess, or maybe both. I don't know. But Ham...
Yeah, it's right. You don't know. And so then why is Cain in? I mean, that's a long conversation.
Some think the black line runs from Ham.
Right.
But both of them, again, use religion to be justifying what we would today call one of the worst things, racism.
Okay, well, don't...
How about our God's science? Has our God's science ever been used to justify racism? Just read kind of any book from Darwin to Hitler, and you'll have all kinds of ideas about eugenics and racial superiority and all of this. And in fact, if you have any understanding of the Scopes trial and William Jennings Bryant, this hayseed who was against evolution because it's against the Bible, if you do any study of William Jennings Bryant, you're going to realize that part of what they are pushing against are all of the ideas from science that is basically having a hierarchy of evolved human beings. And because black people have dark skin and gorillas and chimps have dark skin, therefore science says that gorillas and chimps and black people are lower forms of evolution from us pasty white folks. Science says that, but science never changes. I'm really not going to get very far in this video. Peterson is being very good here, but I'm being very bad. But I can be very bad because Peterson's sitting there having the conversation. I'm just sitting here sticking my nose where it doesn't belong.
Right.
Is it worth it to resurrect that whole structure when it comes with that? It's what I call the one turd in the pool theory. A book that contains, we're okay with slavery, it's terrible on women, it's terrible on homosexuals.
Science says, black people and monkeys, because they're both sort of brownish, Is that the turd in the pool with science? But we've gotten beyond that now. Or is the God science and their priests that don't say that they're priests at all, even though none of them can agree, they change their mind? I mean, this is, again, I'd love, I don't know. Well, one thing we know is that Jordan Peterson's book isn't sort of just zapping atheism out of people, because Bill Maher read it and he's still there. But that doesn't mean that this book didn't impact him, because, again, they're having the conversation. And Peterson is doing, in my opinion, he's behaving very, very well.
It's like if somebody said, yeah, but you know what? There's only one turd in the pool. Jump on in. I wouldn't jump in if there was even one turd in the pool.
Well, you know what? There's that turd that science gave us that we sort of got socially shamed out of eugenics in the science pool, but that isn't enough to keep you out of the science and rationality and new atheist pool. I mean, give me a break. Whoops.
The pool. And I wouldn't want to like resurrect a book and a mythology that...
Well, okay.
You get me?
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing incoherent about that argument. Although I think it still leaves you in an awkward position, because the postmodernist would say, take a look at your stance and say, well, you defend Western civilization, and there's plenty of turds floating in that pool. Well, but
okay.
Right.
All right, you win that one.
Well, it's rough, because
there are plenty of turds floating in that pool. That's true.
Right? And
but here's the thing: we can fish our turds out. Like, we had slavery, but we fished that turd out
because it was science that ended slavery. Did science end slavery, or did Hitler shame us out of eugenics?
Out of the pool. You can't do that. The Bible is the Bible.
Yeah,
it's there, and it was written by God.
It was the Protestant evangelists that did that.
Did what?
Took that particular bit of pollution out of the pool, right? That was Wilberforce in the UK, and he was completely motivated by religious motivations.
People who were for emancipation.
He was the one who one who convinced the UK.
And this is how you see how little Maher knows. He doesn't know anything about Wilberforce.
To put their navy against slavery.
In 1776, when our country was declared independent, there were 24 people in this country who belonged to the Abolitionist Society. Mm-hmm. They were mostly Quakers. Mm-hmm. 24 people.
Boy, I'm sure glad they were Quakers and not Christians. We wouldn't want that now, would we?
The whole fucking country thought abolition of slaves was a good idea.
Yeah. Well, Wilberforce in the UK started out kind of as one.
But it gathered steam.
Right.
It gathered steam in 87 years.
It gathered steam because of science. Because, like, in the 1860s, all of those proto-Darwinians and eugenicists looked around and said, all men were created equal. Oh, wait a minute. No, that was Thomas Jefferson, and he cut out all the miraculous parts of the book. And I mean, it's funny because Maher understands. He just finished talking about the critique, and here basically,
years later, 7 years later, we did something about it. That's the big argument against religion versus.
We did something about it. How old is Bill Maher? No. There's a little bit of collectivism working there too, isn't there, Bill? We did something about it. Suddenly he's team Abraham Lincoln. I know in the 1860s, my ancestors were being Jews in the Netherlands and Frisians taking care of cows. I don't know what his were doing, but he suddenly has a we. Well, in what way does science establish that we are God's science?
Science. It's self-correcting. We can be self-correcting.
Science is self-correcting. Even though all those scientists, it's self-correcting. Well, was it self-correcting? No, it's basically Hitler. You know, when Hitler, everybody did it, they thought all these Christian sensibilities sort of welled up and people said, well, maybe we shouldn't kill Jews and blacks and all of these marginalized people, and maybe that's a bad idea. Science says that's a bad idea. Science doesn't say anything about that, ever.
Religion, to a lot of people, seems too rigid. I mean, its virtue is that it's set in.
Seems too rigid. I thought science was supposed to be this massive thing that never changes, and it's always the same. And of course, every era is all. It's like science is basically the daughter of math, and 2 + 2 = 4, and there's all the sciencey stuff. And I mean, this stuff that Maher is spitting, it's like, come on, Bill.
Stone. This is what we believe. That's what they're counting on, is that people want that sort of certainty about something.
Okay, so
that it's
then,
not going to change. That's what the
People want that sort of certainty about something, so they look to religion instead of science, which can give them real certainty because science never changes and it always corrects its ways.
hope is always selling.
So one of the criticisms that Christ levies against the Pharisees in particular is exactly that criticism. He says to them, this is one of the things that sets himself up for crucifixion because it's a very vicious insult. He tells the Pharisees that they worship their own doctrines as if they're religious truths, and that they would have killed the prophets. Had they been around in the time of the prophets that they purport to worship, they would have killed them. Said that they walk across.
And I suppose you could say if Bill Maher had been worshiping the god science in 2035, he would have said, yeah, maybe because black people are brown and chimps are brown and apes are brown, then black people are less evolved. And chimps and apes were found where black people live, and maybe the evolution just crosses the Mediterranean, and science says it. And science always tells the truth. It never lies, and it never changes except when we decide to change it. So say we all. Yuck, yuck, yuck.
The graves of their own prophets. Yeah. They haunt the graves of their own prophets. That's a good way of thinking about it. So he accuses them of a very deep cynicism. And he's trying to make the same point you're making, which is that you're not supposed to worship the static doctrines of men as if they're religious doctrines, and that there's something in the transformation process that isn't encapsulated in the letter of the law. So what would you say? You don't privilege the letter of the law over the spirit of the law. And I think part of what the genuine religious enterprise is the attempt to identify what that spirit is, that dynamic spirit. And I think that can be done. I think, and it does, it has an affinity, for example, with this idea that it's incumbent on you to voluntarily confront the tragedy and malevolence of life. And that if you do that, it will transform you. And we know that clinically. Like, all the different schools of psychotherapy converged on a few realizations. One of them was that it was useful to get people to get their story straight, to recount their story.
Right.
Another was that if you expose people to the things that they're afraid of and that they're avoiding, that they get stronger. That works. That's how you help people overcome anxiety, for example, social anxiety. It's also the fundamental mechanism of learning, is to put yourself on the edge of disaster and dance there, and that expands you.
Gordon Liddy once said that he was afraid of lightning, so he tied himself to a tree during a storm. I mean, that's an extreme version.
And now we know there isn't a God, because if there was, and it was Gordon Liddy tied to a tree. Yeah, but look, you use exposure training and therapy all the time. And a lot of what you do when you're trying to help people heal is return to that idea of the snake on the staff. It's like, what are you afraid of that's stopping you from moving forward? That's what you try to find out in therapy. It's like, what is it that's paralyzing you? Okay, now can we break that down?
Now you can see what Peterson sort of gently and subtly does with, now psychology is supposed to be a science. And then science is validating some of the things that we hear Jesus say. So again, Peterson's trying to say, okay, well, let's have a conversation about this one body of knowledge, scientia, knowledge.
Down into manageable bites so that you can confront it. And people, see, it was a weird thing because the behaviors were the first people that figured this out, that you could expose people to what they were afraid of voluntarily, and that they would that they would become less afraid. That was the theory. They'd become less afraid. The psychoanalyst said that's not going to work because maybe someone's afraid of an elevator, but they're not really afraid of the elevator. They're afraid of death. And if you get them to relax about the elevator, their fear will just pop up somewhere else.
Right.
But that isn't what happened. What happened was that if you got people to face any one thing they were afraid of voluntarily, they started to learn that they were more capable than they thought. And that made their bravery generalize. And that's really what kids do when they go out into the world, right? They find a challenge and they overcome it. And they learn that they're the sort of creature that can find a challenge and overcome it. And that generalizes. And that happens.
Now, I don't know this. It's a suspicion. I don't think Bill Maher is a very good listener. He's not dumb. We know that. He sort of looks like he's listening. But when I listen to the responses he gives, I sort of get the sense that he's got a fairly noisy head. And so he's picking up a few little things. This is a very common listening pattern, of course. I do it often. But one of the things that Peterson, of course, has had a lot of training in as a clinician, and one of the things that you do as a clinician is you learn, and he's spoken about this quite a bit, you learn to listen very carefully. And it's actually a disciplined thing. It's a difficult thing to master, but you learn to listen very carefully. And the payoff of learning to listen very carefully is you can learn. And I suspect, I don't know it, of course, science hasn't told me, that Maher probably is, he's got kind of a noisy head and blah, blah. And then every now and then, so he's got his noise, and then every now and then something sort of pokes through that Peterson says in his salience hierarchy, and then he's got a response. And so I suspect that, because often I find comedians to be fairly sharp, intuitive observers of irony and hypocrisy in our culture. I think in order to be a really skilled comedian, you need to have that. And Maher is really good at that. But, I'd say that Joe Rogan 5 years ago, 3 years ago, was sort of on the same page as Maher. Rogan's been moving. Most of Maher's guests are not the kinds of people that Joe Rogan is talking to. Most of Maher's guests are, now again, they're clearly people on his HBO show that he thinks about. But, and again, on Politically Incorrect, I forget what that woman's name was. She was a Christian, and didn't hurt that she was an attractive woman too. But he had her on a lot. And I would get a little frustrated because I didn't think she necessarily did the best job of communicating Christianity to him in a way, I think, closer to what Peterson is doing here, in some way that he can appreciate. But when Peterson, I think, listened very carefully to this, and hardly anything novel was coming out of Maher's mouth. If you paid even a little bit of attention to how many new atheists, he's kind of NPCing a bunch of new atheist talking points.
Happened in psychotherapy. And then there's a radicalization of that idea in the Gospels and in this story of the brazen serpent. It's like there's no limit to that. You take the worst, and this is also part and parcel of hero myth, because the most ancient story we have, literally, is a variant of the dragon treasure story, right? That the quest is...
I love that part in the book.
Yeah. It's a very useful thing to know.
Look, if you're a person who has been listening for this last half hour and doesn't know what the fuck we're talking about, that book isn't for you. But if you're a person who has even a little bit of understanding of the Bible, you don't even have to be religious. It's a historical document. I really found this book so fascinating. It's so great. It's like what you were describing about your lecture. It's like your lecture in a book form. Somebody who knows how to tell a story, make you think differently, things. Even in the blurb I gave you, and you're a friend, I'm trying to be supportive. I had to even say at the end, I didn't get all the way with him.
Yeah.
You didn't convince me, because I feel like you're more religious than you used to be, or at least willing to give it a try. And maybe that has to do with you getting sick. I don't know.
I don't think so.
But what a ride to go on.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
I love that book.
I'm glad to.
So he loved the book. Not sure how much he learned from it, but he loved it. And I hope I have time to come back to this. I have 15 minutes before I got to leave, and I should thumbnail this and title this and upload this because I'm going to get back late tonight after having what I really anticipate. I think Karen Wong is going to be there from the meeting code. She was just at the last conference, so I'll see her at this new group. Maybe her daughter, who was at the conference, will be there too. I don't know how many people will be there tonight. I'm a little bit worried. Because I'm such a bad pastor, because if I showed up and there were 300 people there, I would say, oh, crap. And I'm not trying to, disincentivize anybody from going, but 300 people would be, oh, what am I going to do with all these people? If I show up and there's like 8 people there, I'll be like, perfect. 8 people. It's perfect size for a group. If there's 16, I'll say, okay, let's split up into 2 groups, and I'll look around and say, anybody else know how to do this estuary thing? Anyway, yeah, there's a ton of good stuff in this whole video, and it's worthwhile listening to. So check it out, and maybe if I can find the time, I can walk through more of it because there's a lot of stuff I'd like to say. Anyway, so leave a comment.